The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday, February 20th. A sad day, if I can say. It's a sad day. A sad day for a lot of reasons, but certainly a lead story with the release of the 4 bodies, primarily the bodies of the 2 babies, today by Hamas. We'll be talking about that. We'll talk more about Ukraine. There's a lot more to talk about Ukraine. What's interesting is not so much what's happening in Ukraine, but all the different commentary on Ukraine. So we will start with a super chat question from Alex Epstein, who asked me to comment on a post by Richard Hanania on the situation in Ukraine, and it's an interesting post because it deals with both the more practical issue. Anyway, it's an interesting post, so we'll analyze this post. We'll spend a little bit of time on it. I think it's worth it. It's the origin of much confusion, I think, among people, and indicated confusion that exists out there in the culture about the moral and the practical. But we'll talk about more about Ukraine because there's a lot happening. We'll talk about Elon Musk's commentary in Ukraine, about what's happening at the UN, about Europe and what Europe is trying to do or not do, about what the prospects are for Ukraine without American support. So there's a lot to talk about with regard to what is going on with Ukraine. We'll then shift to domestic policy. We've got a new decision or a decision by the Defense Secretary, Hegseth, to significantly cut defense spending by 40% over the next 5 years. 40%. That is a lot. So we'll talk about that, what that means, where the cuts are going to come from, and so on. And then we'll talk about. I predicted Trump was looking for a deal with China, so there are now stories coming out about a potential deal with China, primarily focused on trade, but who knows how broad and wide such a deal could get. If I were the Taiwanese, I'd be pretty nervous. We'll talk about that. And then finally, God, I mean, I'm on an anti-Elon Musk theme today, and I think I'm going to be for quite a while, given his behavior. But some signs of real cronyism with regard to X, and pretty serious accusations that are being floated. Again, who knows how much of it is real, but it certainly sounds real. It sounds right, and it's scary. It is absolutely scary. Everybody assumes that the cronyism relates to SpaceX and to Tesla, but cronyism with regard to X, to Twitter. As we'll see, I think Musk is completely losing it. He completely lost it. He's lost the threat. It's interesting psychologically what caused this. I mean, I don't think he was always like this, but something is just a switch is flipped, and we will see. We'll get into more details of that. Let's see. Beyond that, I remind you that the show is funded through listeners like you. So please consider supporting the show. And one way to do it and to impact the content of the show is to step in with super chats, ask questions. I answer all the super chats. I read them all aloud. You can make comments. You can discuss them in any way. You can say whatever you want to say, at least whatever YouTube will allow you to say. And I will read them out. So if you would like to shape the comment, or disagree with me, or ask a leading question, or ask a subversive question, whatever you want, the super chat is available for that. We have hourly targets, and let's do it. Let's achieve the targets. All right. Trying to think if there's anything else that we need to, in terms of introductory commentary or logistics. I think we're all good. Tomorrow's show will be on time, and then there will be a show on Saturday on some positive thing. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but all right. Let's talk about Hamas. So, as I think a lot of you know, and might have seen some TV or photos of this today, Hamas released the bodies of 4 of the hostages. 3 of the 4 bodies were of a mother and 2 young children. We don't know the exact circumstances under which these children died. In a sense, is what killed them. We know the circumstances. We don't know what killed them specifically. But they were in Gaza because they were kidnapped by Palestinians, probably civilians. They were kept among civilian Palestinians. Maybe at some point they were moved into tunnels by Hamas, but they were kept by civilians. Civilians knew where they were. Civilians were all around them. We're talking about a little baby that, when taken hostage, was a few months old. Would have been about 2 now, and another that was 2 when taken, or 2 plus, and today would have been somewhere between 3 and 4. Little baby boys. And however they died, they were murdered by Hamas. They were taken from their home in Israel. They were brought to Gaza for the explicit purpose of trading them in some kind of deal. I mean, just think of how despicable that is. Some kind of deal for murderers, for terrorists, for really horrific human beings, if you can even call them human beings, horrific animals. They were kept under horrible conditions. We know that from the ones from the hostages who were released alive. And what is particularly shocking about this, because, I mean, what's new about Hamas, right? They killed over 50 children on October 7th, and they killed them in front of their parents. They burnt them. You know all the stories, right? They raped women. They raped and killed them. They gang raped them and killed them. They burnt them. I mean, the barbarism is off the charts. It's barbarism that should remind us of what life was maybe like in certain parts of the world, and even in Europe 500, 600 years ago, thousands of years ago, certainly. But that, for the most part, in the West, we believed was gone. Barbarism like this didn't exist, and was eradicated maybe in some dark corners of the world. Well, it turns out Gaza is a dark corner of the world. Hamas embraces this barbarism, but what is shocking about it? Because look, the Russians in Ukraine are doing horrible things. They're kidnapping children. They're training those children to fight against Ukraine. They are raping. They're pillaging. They're murdering civilians. We saw that in the first few weeks of the war around Kiev. They are committing horrific acts against the civilians of Ukraine. But there's a difference. And the difference is that Russia denies all that. I mean, it's pathetic that they deny it, but they deny it. I mean, Lavrov just the other day said, "Oh, we don't bomb civilians. We follow the rules of law, supposedly. completely. We don't kill civilians. We don't rape anybody. We don't do this stuff. None of that happened. It's all propaganda. They know that those actions are barbaric, and they don't want to be associated with the barbarism, even though they do it. And everybody knows they do it, and they know they do it, and yet they still deny it. Hamas relishes it, embraces it, cherishes it, celebrates it. You could tell that by the fact that on October 7th, they live streamed the rape and murder and pillage and the killing of children. You know this because on October 7th, they were, we've got at least one phone call of one of them calling his parents with pride, telling them that he was killing Jews. And we know this because today, before releasing the 4 bodies, the coffins were paraded around. Palestinians were celebrating the death of little children, celebrating. Not a death of little children in an act of, in a struggle for self-defense. No, the death of the murder, the first-degree murder, kidnapping and murder of little children. And they were celebrating this in the streets of Gaza. And yeah, some of them were dressed up as Hamas fighters, and there was a contingent of Hamas fighters there in, quote, military uniform. But the rest of the thousands of celebrators were civilians. Civilians demonstrating or celebrating the death of children. They are the only people I know of right now, at least publicly in the world, who celebrate their barbarism, who take pride in their barbarism, who take their barbarism a sign of strength and self-esteem and power. These are true barbarians. And it's not just Hamas. It's the Palestinian people. It is sick, depraved, barbaric, primitive culture. It is a culture that needs to be gone, eliminated. It is a people that need to be brought to their knees, because that is the only way their culture, they will eliminate their own culture. It cannot be that a civilized culture, and with all its flaws, Israel is civilized. Not every person in Israel is civilized. There certainly are crazy religious nuts in Israel. But the vast, vast majority of Israelis are civilized. That a civilized culture needs to tolerate these barbarians on their border. That a civilized culture needs to negotiate with barbarians. That a civilized culture has brought itself to the level of releasing murderers, kidnappers, rapists, in those negotiations in order to free the bodies of some of its hostages. It is truly despicable. Truly despicable. So, the tolerance for Hamas and for the Palestinians, the fact that everybody tolerates them, Europe tolerates them, but primarily, if you think about what this says about the American left, if you think about what this says about the student protesters, I mean, it's one thing to advocate for a cause It's one thing to advocate for oppressed people, but to advocate for the murderers of children, the first-degree murderers of children, to advocate for rapists, murderers, barbarians, that is really a new low for the American left. I mean, they were low already when they supported North Vietnam in the Vietnam War. But again, you could tell, at least then, there was a clear American interest in not being there. So it tells you something about kind of how nutty the nutty left has become in America, and it's great to see. I mean, the best thing about what's happening right now is the complete marginalization of the crazy left, and we'll see how willing the Democratic Party is to play this out, to actually marginalize them, to kick them out, to make them unwelcome within the Democratic Party. There's some signs, maybe there's some people who'd like to do that, but it's not happening yet. Certainly American society, American culture repudiates these leftists, and that's a big part of why Donald Trump, I think, won. Will the Democrats get the message? I don't know. But yeah, the scenes we saw today in Gaza, the Red Cross threatened not to participate in the ceremony of releasing the bodies. Another despicable act of the Red Cross, even to consider it. And Hamas basically said, okay, we won't release them. And the Red Cross, in the end, had a table on the stage where they signed some documents. The whole show, the whole farce, the whole presentation is so disgusting. The only thing I would want to do is basically bomb the place into oblivion. Yeah. To tolerate these photos on TV, to tolerate them photographing them, and to feel free for them to do it without any fear of consequences. Unbelievable. I mean, yeah, this is the state of the world. And of course, it's the ICC, it's the Israeli government that's under investigation by the ICC. It's the Israeli government that is fearful to travel overseas. It is Israeli soldiers who might have served in Gaza who are afraid to go to Europe now because they might be arrested there, or to South America, places like Brazil, because they might be arrested there. I mean, they are somehow the villains. When, for all to see, we see the pictures, and it's not anybody's interpretation, but the pictures that Hamas, or the ceremonies, the celebrations, the barbarism is fully on display in Gaza. Nobody has any excuse anymore. All right, so let's put that aside. It is truly horrific. And if you haven't seen the video, I don't know. I guess I suggest you do, because it's worth seeing it, just so you know how bad the world is. But I can't recommend it because it's truly awful. All right, let's shift now to another horrible situation, if you will, in the world, and in particular. Let's talk about Ukraine. And in particular with Ukraine, there's this post by Richard Hanania that Alex Epstein has asked me to analyze, and I will. So I'll read it to you, and then we'll do the analysis. And then after that, we'll talk about Musk and Ukraine. There's a number of things coming out of Musk, and then there's just a bunch of stuff coming out of the administration and everything else regarding Musk and so on. So we'll talk about all of that. So let's start with and let me just say about Richard Hanania. Hanania, somebody, as you know, I think, because I've talked about him, that I have a great amount of respect for. He really has an extraordinary mind and has had some of the most influential articles and good articles, not just influential, but influential for the good over the last few years, primarily on DEI and its origins, but also on a lot of things. He also, I think, has the right perspective on many on the right. He's very, very critical of a lot of kind of MAGA. He's very critical of MAGA generally. He's also very critical on the left. So he's kind of he's very, I don't think balanced is the right word, but he's fairly objective when it comes to analyzing both the right and the left in terms of their insanity on both sides, but also in terms of the positives on both sides. So he's become, over the last year or so, very much pro-immigration, which is a huge plus for somebody who he used to be a racist and I think part of the pretty bad right, but has become now very pro-immigration. He's very pro-Israel. He's very pro-Ukraine. Has been. We'll talk about that. And generally, I think his positions on a lot of different issues align quite well with mine, and he articulates his case very, very well. He's a good writer. He's a very good writer. So let's take on this piece he wrote. It's short that he wrote on Twitter today. Today, I think it's today. There's a timestamp here. Actually, it was yesterday. Okay, so yesterday. He writes so much. I mean, he's on Twitter constantly, and he's constantly writing. And he's a good writer. I mean, good writers, just it flows out of them. So they're constantly, if you're on Twitter, good writers are just constantly writing, and it's all of it's of some value. Although this particular piece, I think, could have benefited from a little bit more thought before he posted it. All right, so here is his post. He writes, Ukraine is a head versus heart issue for me. We'll note in a minute what he associates with head and what he associates with heart, which is in and of itself interesting and conventional. Ukraine's cause is righteous. There is nothing morally defensible about the Putin regime. The people who hate Ukraine are almost inevitably the worst people out there. The correlation between anti-vax and anti-Ukraine is near perfect. They live in a world of fake news, petty, mean-spirited grievance. They lie about everything from Eastern Europe to the federal budget. The other day, I saw Ashley Sinclair attack Zelensky like she was some kind of moral exemplar. Ukrainians are bravely dying for their country. The cattards of the world, the stupid, the conspiracy theorists, the e-sluts, all sit there laughing at them. American demagogues telling their fat audiences that spending on Ukraine is the reason their lives are so hard. The most privileged, morally bankrupt people in the world lecturing those who are experiencing real hardship and showing actual bravery. The anti-Ukraine movement is disgusting. I don't want these people to win. Now, up until there, except for the opening sentence, I mean, that is excellent and well written. This is the kind of stuff I like from Hanania. This is very, very good. Now, you'll note that he associates with his heart. Now let's go to his head. I continue from Hanania. That said, if that was the end of my analysis, I would be no better than them, i.e., quote, an emotionalist. And in truth, I can't see what the point of this slaughter is. I don't think they're getting all the land back. Hundreds of thousands dead. They can be hundreds of thousands more. The border can move a few miles to the west or east as a result. For what? I don't believe Putin will move on to Poland next. This is fantasy. I think it's something people tell themselves because they know Ukraine's cause is morally righteous, but there's no way to justify all this slaughter based on where exactly the borders end up in eastern Ukraine alone. Putin was in power for over 20 years before he tried to take over Ukraine. If he wants to reconstitute the old Soviet Union, he's 72 years old and is going to have to hurry. There needs to be a peace deal, and it's going to have to solve Ukraine giving up land. It has to involve Ukraine giving up land. Hopefully, it also maintains the transatlantic alliance. I worry about the Trump administration's willingness and ability to pull this off and not sell out all of Europe in the meantime. But if the immediate concern is the well-being of Ukraine, the sooner this ends, the better. That he associates with the head analysis. And I think there's so much flawed here that is worth talking about. So we're going to talk. The first part, I agree completely. I have no qualms with 100%. And I think he's attacking Ashley Sinclair and he's attacking MAGA, but he should include Donald Trump and Elon Musk in that analysis, and I think he'd probably agree with that. So let's take on this second part. Is this objective? So he writes and he says, and in truth, I can't see what the point of this of all this slaughter is. Now, that might be true. It might be absolutely true that Richard Hanania can't see the point of all this slaughter. And indeed, it's probably true that most Americans cannot see it. They don't live in Ukraine. They don't know what it's like to live under Russian authority. They've never experienced the Soviet Union or what it was like when the Russians ruled Ukraine, or the years where the Ukrainians wanted to go and join the West and weren't allowed to. They are not living in some of the towns and cities that were occupied by Russia, where women were raped, people were tortured, slaughtered, and where the children were taken hostage, like in Hamas, just taken to be re-educated as Russians. Yes, Americans sitting, including Richard here, sitting in their comfortable homes. What did he say? The most privileged, morally bankrupt people. So I'm not going to call you morally bankrupt, but privileged people, people with, live in a great place with basically peace. Americans haven't died in numbers in a war since Vietnam, and they haven't had a foreign country invade their territory since, 1812. Is that right? Since 1812? So, maybe you don't see it, but people don't want to live under Russian control. And we can talk in a minute about whether the border will move this way or that way, but, give me liberty or give me death was an American slogan once. And it was about, not succumbing to dictatorship, authoritarianism. It was about fighting for your freedom. Now, maybe that fight is futile. Maybe it is. Maybe Ukraine will lose. Maybe they'll never get it back. But isn't it better to fight for your freedom than just to give up? Some people believe it is. And maybe you wouldn't. But here's the bigger point. Richard is not being asked to go to Ukraine to fight. No American is being asked to go to Ukraine to fight. For that matter, at this point, no European is being asked to go to Ukraine to fight. That is, the people being slaughtered are the people of Ukraine who are choosing this war and have chosen this war because it's their country that's being invaded by a horrible monster. And the monster is not just Putin. The monster is the Russian regime, which is much bigger than Putin. We'll get to that in a minute. So, whether you see a point in the slaughter or not, I don't see a point in slaughter either. And I think there's a way to end the slaughter that does not involve defeat. It involves winning. And then the question is, how do you win? You're not being asked to go fight. Why is the death of Ukrainians bothering you? It's their choice. It's their country. It's their fight. And they're the ones doing the fighting. It's true that there are hundreds of thousands of dead. And there are going to be hundreds of thousands more, one way or the other, whether there's a deal or not, in my view. Now, this defeatism, the border can move a few miles to the west or east as a result. Maybe. But the reality is that the only reason that Russia has done as well as it has is because of the lack of support from the West. All the West is asked to do is to support Ukraine. Support it morally. Support it militarily with weapons, not with people. Support it financially. But the support financially is small. Almost all of the support for Ukraine has been military. And again, it has been out of stockpiles that the U.S. is not going to use anyway and need replacing. So it's cost the United States very little to support Ukraine. But even if I can understand you saying, okay, we've spent enough on Ukraine, we shouldn't spend any more on Ukraine. That's fine. You could slowly ease off of supporting Ukraine. Maybe, hopefully, the Europeans would step in and replace it. But that's not what we're doing. We are negotiating, the United States of America, Donald Trump, is negotiating a peace deal for Ukraine. Who the hell nominated, voted in Ukraine for Donald Trump to represent them? But the reality is that Ukraine can win this. I mean, it probably needs American support, more on the intelligence side, the information side, than the financial side. It needs probably American intelligence, satellite info, some technology. It doesn't need huge amounts of arms from America. Europeans can probably fill in that gap. It needs moral support. It cannot win without that, no question. But the reality is, and I don't know why nobody seems to care, the reality is that Russia has lost even more people than Ukraine has. Russia's economy is in shambles. Quality of life, standard of living has plummeted in Russia. Its entire economy these days relies on the military-industrial complex. Unbelievably corrupt. But basically, all it can build are tanks and machine guns and things like that. Russia's economy cannot sustain itself like this for very long. Ukraine, with the backing of Europe and ideally the United States, I think can easily out-sustain the Russians. But again, Ukraine could be gaining more territory, could be pushing the Russians back if they had proper military support in terms of weapon systems from the West. It is not. Weapon systems have been slow in coming, delayed, and they weren't even allowed to use them properly when they got them. Here's an interesting stat. In April 2022, when Russia retreated from the north of Ukraine. So in April 2022, you remember Russia retreated from the northern Ukraine. They couldn't take Kiev, so they decided to retreat. They were bogged down. It was going nowhere. So they retreated from the very north. Russia controlled 19.6% of Ukrainian territory, and its casualties, dead and wounded, were probably maybe 20,000. This is Russia. 20,000 dead and wounded, and it controlled 19.6% of Ukraine. Today, Russia controls 19.2% of Ukraine, so a little less. And its casualties are said to be somewhere around 800,000 men. 800,000, close to a million. So we're worried about Ukrainian casualties, but not about Russian casualties in terms of the impact it has on them. So no, I don't think the border can move just a few miles east or west. I think you could do a lot more if you're willing to do it. And then he says, for what? I don't believe Putin will move on to Poland next. That is a fantasy. I agree. Putin probably won't move on to Poland next. He likely will spend some time figuring out how to take the rest of Ukraine, or at least place Ukraine under Russia's thumb and replace its existing government with a puppet government of Russia's, in spite of the fact that clearly that is not what the Ukrainian people want. They're fighting to avoid that. It's exactly why they're willing to engage in the fight, to avoid that. But then, once he has Ukraine under his thumb, he won't go to Poland. Granted, Poland has built up the largest military force in Europe. Poland would destroy Russia. Look at what Ukraine has done. Now, Poland, larger army, completely equipped with some of the latest and best Western military technology. I mean, Putin doesn't have a chance, and he knows it. So he's unlikely to go to Poland. We'll keep that for later. But as he rearms and rebuilds, he's got a big industrial military complex now. He can't just unwind that quickly. I mean, what will happen to all the people working there? I mean, his whole economy now is built on just that one. So where does he go? What does he use the military for? Well, if you've ever seen a map of the Baltics, you know that Russia has a claim to the entire Baltic region. It believes that Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia are all part of Russia, just like Ukraine. Indeed, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania have large Russian populations. How long would it take Russia to occupy Estonia? Hours? Days? Estonia has a population, of 1.5 million? It's tiny. And it doesn't border with any significant NATO member. It doesn't have a border with Poland. It has a border with Latvia on the one side and Russia on the other side. I don't think it borders Finland. So it's just a matter of hours, days, and he's taking Estonia. Will the rest of Europe march to Estonia's relief once they see what happened in Ukraine? Will America support NATO? Will Article 5 actually kick in? Will anybody care? And then once he has Estonia, it's fairly easy to take Latvia. And then Lithuania is right there. And that will connect Kaliningrad, which is this little Russian inlet surrounded by NATO. It will make that part of Russia a contiguous landmass with Russia. Will Poland then intervene? Will Poland invade Russia in order to protect the Lithuanians, the Latvians, and the Estonians? Maybe. Maybe not. We don't know. Certainly the United States under Trump would not. And who knows who the next president under President J.D. Vance would not. So, yeah, Poland is safe, probably, for now. But the rest of these smaller places, now, I won't even mention the fact that Georgia is already basically the country of Georgia is basically already a satellite state with a government that is completely under the thumb of the Russians, with elections that are completely corrupted by the Russians. Belarus is already a basically arm of Russia. It's part of Russia. the government there does everything according to what Putin tells them to do. Once you have Ukraine, Moldova is not that far. Who's going to defend Moldova? Moldova? Nobody's going to defend Moldova. And then you've got Romania. Now, I don't know. Maybe by then, Putin will have arranged for Romania to have this pro-Russian president elected. And maybe Romania tilts towards a pro-Russian government, and who needs to invade them if they're already part of the Russian sphere? I mean, this is not hypothetical, crazy. It's not a fantasy, Richard says, to think that he'll invade Poland is a fantasy. It's not a fantasy to see Putin, we'll get to Putin in a minute, the Russian government expanding its influence across the entire Eastern Europe. Of course, while all that, Putin will be viewed as a winner. Russia will be viewed as the strongman in Europe. Europe will be viewed as weak and a loser. The United States as having abandoned Europe, and the United States as having, helped Russia attain all this. And you can see the dominoes falling one by one, not by invasion, but by just acceptance. Political parties rising to the top who are pro-Russian. I mean, imagine AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen in France. And Europe is now basically under the influence, all of Europe, including Western Europe, is now theoretically under the influence of Russia. Now, that's far-reaching. That's maybe a little pushing the envelope. Maybe that is a little bit of a fantasy. But it's not that crazy. And certainly the first pieces, the Baltics, Georgia, Moldova, these other parties, that is not a big fantasy. And Poland might resist. Poland might stand out and resist. But Poland does not have nukes. It relies on UK, France, and the United States to provide a nuclear umbrella for it. How long does that last? If you're going to do geopolitics, then you've got to do geopolitics. You've got to think about all the players in place, and you've got to think long term, and you have to think about all the moving parts. Just saying Poland is a fantasy is not thinking. It's not the mind. We'll get to the more practical dichotomy in a minute. So, and this is not, one second, let me just go on and say, Putin was in power for over 20 years. He's going to be 72 years old. He is going to have to hurry, but that assumes, and maybe I'm playing into that assumption by constantly talking about Putin, but that assumes that Putin is what's driving all this. That if Putin was gone tomorrow, that Russia would fold and its ambitions would disappear. But that is a misunderstanding of the role of ideas in what is happening in Russia, the role of the dominant intellectuals in Russia. The reality is that the support for Putin is vast among Russian elites. And is vast among the potential successors to Putin. And it's vast among the intellectuals around Putin. It's not like the guy, let's say it's Medvedev, who might very well be the guy who replaces Putin. I don't know how old Medvedev is. Maybe he's the same age. But there's got to be some younger guy who's going to replace Putin. It's not like that guy is going to say, yeah, Putin was all wrong. That was all. This empire, this ambition to create empire, this ambition to create a greater Russia, this ambition for Russian imperialism, oh no, that was just Putin. No, that's Russia. That's Dugin. That's intellectual, philosopher after intellectual within Russia that believes in a greater Russia and believes, if you read Dugin and others, not just Dugin, just watch Russian television, you can see it. They believe that Russia's destiny is to dominate Europe. It doesn't have to occupy Europe, but it must dominate Europe from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. And that Ukraine is just the first piece and that they will rebuild, and they will rebuild their military might. And they will, and Europe is weak because it's leftist and it's PC and it's DEI and it's woke and whatever. And therefore, Europe will slowly crumble before the influence of the Russian. And ultimately, Russia will be the dominant player in Europe. The US is going to retreat from Europe, as Trump is indicating, and then Russia will be left to dominate it. That won't happen tomorrow. It won't happen in a couple of years. But bad guys always seem to think long term. They seem to have this capacity to imagine the world long term and to plan for that and to move forward with that. Now, there is certainly a need for a peace deal. And if we go in, if one goes into negotiation with Putin and demands peace and threatens, if you start by threatening complete sanctions against Russia, decapitating, eliminating their ability to export oil, at least through the shipping lanes of the world. And then you lay down the law. You basically, this is what Trump was saying he would do just a couple of months ago, saying, I am going to arm Ukraine to the teeth. I'm going to give them every weapon they can imagine. And I will put them into NATO unless you leave Ukraine. Now, maybe you give Russia the 2014 border. Maybe you give them Crimea and a bit of the east of Ukraine. But if you go in with a tough negotiating position, with NATO membership on the table, with expecting Crimea to become Ukraine, with sanctions, real sanctions on Russia, then maybe you can actually cut a peace deal where Russia retreats to its 2014 borders and where you actually have at least a prolonged ceasefire and maybe actually grant Ukraine NATO membership. And maybe that's impossible. Maybe the war has to go on. Maybe you have to arm Ukraine to the teeth so that they can actually make real progress against the Russian army in the next few months, the next couple of years, and only then cut a deal. But to cut a deal where Putin knows he's won, to cut a deal that reflects Western weakness, is to embolden Putin and the Russian regime as a whole, his successors and his successors' successors. It's to make Russia believe it can dominate Europe. Appeasement never works. And this is my big critique, but this is more philosophical. And understandably, I don't think this is something Hanania gets, even from his reading of Ayn Rand. The moral is the practical. If Ukraine's cause is righteous, then Ukraine's cause is right, it's just, and they should win. Now, you could argue practically they can't, but that's not reality. Reality is that evil is impotent. They are weak. They are incapable of winning unless they receive assistance from the good. Russia is weak. Russia cannot win if the good supports Ukraine. But the good has not fully supported Ukraine. It's been mealy-mouthed support. Maybe verbally it's been strong support, but there hasn't been the kind of financial military support that would allow Ukraine to win, and there hasn't been the kind of sanctions on Russia that would collapse its economy. You know, we don't sell to Russia, so we sell to Kazakhstan, and then it passes the border into Russia. If you really want to boycott Russia, figure out all the channels by which stuff gets to Russia and close them. And what is happening, so the moral is the practical. There are practical solutions for the good to win. If the good actually stands up as the good. The worst thing that can happen is what is happening right now. The good, as represented by America, is basically caving completely to evil. Not only didn't the United States go into the negotiating stance strong, it went to the negotiating stance with about as weak a position as you could ever imagine. I just don't get it. No NATO membership for Ukraine under any circumstances. Yes, of course, we'll cede you the territory, Putin. And, and we'll increase diplomatic relations. We'll completely reinstate our embassy staff. You can reinstate your embassy staff in Washington. We love you guys. And we're going to have all this wonderful geopolitical and economic cooperation in the future. That's the starting position of the United States in the negotiation. That's the dumbest stance I've ever heard of. I just saw a tweet by Scott Adams defending it, basically saying, he didn't say this quite like this, basically saying, what do you know, Yaron? Donald Trump is playing 4D chess. You're just an amateur. He is the master negotiator. Just like he negotiated with North Korea, just like the last time he negotiated with China. There is no basis for that. Zero, zilch evidence in reality that that is the case. So Ukraine's cause is righteous. They could win if America was willing to let them. And the betrayal is not just a betrayal of a righteous cause, because the immoral is the impractical, but it is also a betrayal of free countries in Europe. It's a betrayal of America's, never mind defense commitment, but just commitment to freedom, commitment to liberty. I'd be happy to debate Scott Adams if he was willing to debate me, which is highly unlikely. I'd be happy to debate Scott Adams. Set up the forum, set up the time, I'll show up. I have no problem debating him. He's not that well informed or that. Anyway, forget it. Anyway, so I'm disappointed in Hanania because the second part, which is supposed to be his head, is actually mostly emotion. It's actually not thought through. It's actually not making an argument. It's just stating facts as if they're obvious when they're not at all. And the consequence of the immorality of allowing Putin to get away with it, I think are being completely ignored as some kind of fantasy about invading Poland. But that's just not, it's just not real. He does say, I worry about Trump administration's willingness and ability to pull this off and not sell out all of Europe in the meantime. Yeah, but that's exactly what the very essence of this peace plan is doing. And more importantly, the very essence of Trump's posturing, positioning, is blaming Ukraine for starting the war, attacking Ukraine and Zelensky, calling him a dictator and saying nada about Putin. Now, again, Scott Adams claims that is his genius debating tactic. You have to suck up to Putin and attack Ukraine. That's how you ultimately cut out the deal. But here, I think, this is to Scott Adams. I'm not going to impact the outcome of this, and neither Adams. In a couple of months, 3-4 months, we'll know. We'll know how brilliant Trump's negotiating skills are. And here's the tragedy. But for sure, this is what's going to happen. Even if the deal really, really, really sucks for Ukraine, for America, for Europe, Scott Adams will still defend it. He will still claim there's some 4D move that we're not seeing. Just wait and see. It'll happen someday, somewhere. Because he's part of the MAGA mindlessness that just assumes that Donald Trump is always right. And that is going to happen. And, you know, that happened with, you know, the first 4 years of Trump, things that he did that turned out horrible were always defended and justified and excused and rationalized by his supporters, including people like Scott Adams. Yeah, I'll say it's good if it turns out to be, but I know, because I know this stuff, that it won't. And it can't. It just cannot be. Reality is what it is, and things are what they are. So it ain't happening, but if you prove me wrong, just show up, and we'll show up and we'll compare notes. All right, I have a bunch more to say about Ukraine. A few other items on the agenda, but we can go through this pretty quickly. Here's Konstantin Kisin, who's really good on most things, really good. Here's Konstantin Kisin responding to Trump and Musk over their accusations against Zelensky and Ukraine. And this is like one of several things he's written about this. So, but this actually got a response from Musk, which I think is very revealing. Other lies about Ukraine. No, Zelensky hasn't banned opposition parties. He has banned certain opposition parties because they are openly pro-Russian. It's a war. Britain banned the British Union of Fascists during World War II in exactly the same way. America went further and rounded up Japanese Americans and threw them into internment camps. No, Zelensky hasn't suspended independent media. He has suspended pro-Russian media. Even Orwell, arguably the greatest defender of free speech of the 20th century, acknowledged the need for state restrictions on media during war. The idea that in World War II we would allow pro-enemy propaganda on our airwaves is absurd. Absolutely right. There are many legitimate criticisms to be made of the war, of the way this war came about, the way both Ukrainian and Western leadership have behaved, and the failure to end this war when it became clear that Ukraine had done its best and lost. Not sure I agree with that part. But the spectacle of people sitting in warmth, comfortable and plenty, lying and misrepresenting a country and a people who are courageously fighting to defend their land against a bully is sickening. And people who engage in this should be deeply ashamed. They won't, of course, because to most of them, the war in Ukraine isn't a real thing. It's just a topic for online click farming. The only silver lining is we're really finding out who's who. Elon Musk replies, "You're losing credibility with this," he's telling Kisin. Who's losing credibility? Either Zelensky holds an election to prove that he represents the will of the people, or he is a dictator. Konstantin answers, "I agree. He must hold an election when the war is over. That would be consistent with historical precedent, convention, and practical reality. While the war is going on, an election is impossible." And somebody says, "Why is it impossible?" And Kisin says, "It's kind of hard to have an election when portions of your country are occupied. A significant portion of your voters are refugees on the front lines, and you are being bombed on a daily basis." He later says, "I really am starting to think that the failure to understand what I am saying is an IQ problem." And if that's the case, what does that say about his evaluation now of Elon Musk? Again, Kisin is a fan. Kisin was just at the ARC, the Jordan Peterson big conference in London where he spoke, so Kissinger's one of the guys on the right, and yet he's discovering what a lot of people on the right are like. The mindlessness syndrome that I've been talking about. There are people who are mindless. Maybe it's IQ, maybe it's not. I don't know if it's IQ. IQ is too simple of an explanation. So, yeah, good for Kissinger. I agree with basically what he said. And I am horrified, disappointed, even disgusted by what Elon Musk is saying and by what Donald Trump is saying and by Elon Musk's support for Donald Trump on this issue. Now, just to add on to this, the U.S. today refused to co-sponsor or to sign on to a motion backing Ukraine ahead of the war anniversary. So the UN, not an organization I care for at all, was going to release a resolution marking 3 years of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. And the resolution would back Ukraine's territorial integrity and demand that Russia withdraw its troops. While 50 countries have said they would sign on to this, the United States is refusing to sign on. Washington has also objected to a phrase in a statement of the group of 7 nations, these are 7 large economies in the world, that they plan to issue next week that would have condemned Russia's aggression. So the United States refuses now to even condemn Russia's aggression. This is Donald Trump. And how could this end positively? Now, I think the ball now really is, I mean, the U.S. and Russia are going to continue to try to come up with a peace deal. But in the meantime, the ball is in Europe's courts, I think, and the challenge is a European challenge. And the Polish Prime Minister, Poland, again, largest military force, I think, today in Europe, is now advocating that Europe basically seize $270 billion in frozen Russian assets and basically funnel them to Ukraine. I think this is what they should do. I think they should do it immediately. This was cost a lot more than $270 billion. And that would both fund Ukraine, even if the United States withdraws its support, although it's not clear objectively that Ukraine can win this war without at the very least, U.S. intelligence support in terms of Russian troop movements and things like that. But maybe Europe could step in and replace the U.S., but that's going to take some time, and again, it's going to require the Europeans to be a lot stronger than they have been. So I think a lot of what we're going to watch, I'm going to be watching moving forward, is what do Europeans do? How committed are they? Are they willing, for example, to take all these frozen assets, which I think they should? These are Russian assets. Russia started the war. They should forfeit them and give them to Ukraine. I think that would send a message, at least, that Europe is standing by Ukraine, and that'll strengthen the negotiating hand, supposedly, of if there's even a negotiation, not just a surrender of Trump. But as I see it right now, the United States is basically surrendering to Russia on behalf of Ukraine. There's no negotiating going on. Finally, interestingly, Community Notes was an innovation that Elon Musk introduced to Twitter in order to bring some objectivity to the platform. And it's been going well, and Elon Musk has praised it to the moon repeatedly, how well the whole community notes thing is going. However, more recently, community notes have actually started correcting Elon Musk and correcting Donald Trump. And that is, of course, unacceptable to Elon Musk. We want facts and reality, except when I'm speaking. And this is what Elon Musk has posted. Unfortunately, community notes is increasingly being gamed by governments and legacy media, working to fix it. It should be utterly obvious that a Zelensky-controlled poll about his own approval is not credible. If Zelensky was actually loved by the people of Ukraine, he would hold an election. He knows he would lose it in a landslide, despite having seized control of all Ukrainian media, so he canceled the election. So, all of the nonsense Musk has been saying about Zelensky and about Ukraine, really for months now, but particularly recently, the 4% approval rating in Ukraine, which is completely nonsense. The community notes corrected all that, and now he's ticked off. This is what IO, which is one right-wing Twitter channel, posted about this. Quote, Musk now wants to fix community notes because he didn't like it correcting Trump's absurd claim that only 4% of Ukrainians support Zelensky. Well, maybe Trump should fix Grok too, because Grok also regularly debunks Trump's and Musk's claims. Grok is the AI from Musk's own AI company. Even better, Musk should wonder how within a year he went from being an independent moderate, favoring a heterogeneity of viewpoints, to a partisan right-wing propagandist who regularly tweets and retweets misinformation. Absolutely. What happened to Elon Musk over the last year? I think it's that MAGA, it's that Trump, force field around him that changes your perception of reality, like they used to say about Steve Jobs. He goes on to say, Grok on Elon Musk, quote, yes, Elon Musk has posted misinformation or unfactual info from his X account on multiple occasions. Some people on the right are getting it, get it. The smarter ones on the right get it, but it's a shrinking number, and it saddens me that Hanania is not one of them, although he seems to get some of it, but he seems to be open to this. Anyway. I think that's all I'm going to say about Ukraine. All right, let's run through some of these. I'll just remind you again that we've got targets. We're a little short on that first hour target, but we're already into the second hour, so we're really short on the second hour target, so please consider supporting the show. Stickers are acceptable. You can do a sticker. You don't even have to ask a question, although questions encouraged, particularly at the $20 level. There are lots of questions at $5, particularly $20 level, so we can get to our targets and goals. Okay, quickly. The Defense Department, Defense Secretary Hegseth has now ordered the Pentagon to plan for substantial, sweeping budget cuts across the board. Hegseth is looking for 8% cuts to the budget a year for the next 5 years. He has asked every department, senior leaders at the Pentagon, and throughout the U.S. military to develop plans for cutting 8% from the defense budget in each of the next 5 years, according to a memo the memo that has been leaked, I guess. Now, this means over 40%. 8% a year for 4 years is well over 40%. So this, we're talking about almost half, cutting the defense budget in half. Now, a lot of this is great. Hegseth wants to cut anything to do with DEI. He wants to cut everything to do with, nation building. I mean, I'm all for that. Cut all that stuff. I don't know how much it is. I don't know how big that is. So all of that stuff should be cut, and I think Hegseth will cut it, and that's all really, really, really good. But there's 17 categories that are exempt from cuts. 17 categories that are exempt from cuts. Among those are operations on the southern U.S. border. Not the job of the U.S. military anyway. Who's going to invade from the southern border? The Chinese are probably going to come across the Pacific. The Russians are probably not going to invade us, but invade all our allies. But we're going to devote resources to the southern border while we cut massive quantities of funding from our military. Modernization of the nuclear weapons, that actually needs to be done. And missile defense. This is the idea of a Iron Dome for America, which I am hugely in favor of, have been for a long time. I've been talking about the need for a ballistic missile defense system for America. We should be in a position where they just can't reach us. Certainly actors like North Korea and Iran could never do it. Now, the problem with China and Russia is they could overwhelm almost any system by just the sheer number of missiles they could launch at us. But we should at least try to shield ourselves from that. And taking North Korea and Iran and small players off the table, Pakistan off the table would be huge, huge. And then we can focus on how do you take China and Russia off the table. And then finally, another thing that's off the table, acquisitions of submarines. Not sure we need subs. What we need are stealth, not stealth. The Chinese supposedly have now stuff that sees right through our stealth. What we need is unmanned submarines. What we need are drone submarines. And then other stuff that's not being cut is one-way attack drones, good, and other munitions. So I agree with the list, other than operations at the southern U.S. border. Right? They're talking about cutting $50 billion in the next budget year out of defense. Now, we'll see what actually happens when it gets to Congress. This might mean closing some bases. That always, you get congressmen pissed off when you're talking about shutting bases because it affects their district. It might stopping certain weapons plans, weapon building, which again will get resistance from Congress. But this is good. It's good to review all Pentagon spending and focus on certainly cutting the things the government that the military shouldn't be doing. I would cut operations at the border together with DEI, I don't know, sex education training. I don't know what they do, and certainly everything to do with nation building. And I would bring a lot of our troops home from many of the places around the world. Maybe what we should be thinking about is selling nukes to Poland, South Korea, and Japan. That'll stabilize the world. Now, this is in addition to an executive order from Trump that is seeking lists of thousands of probationary Defense Department employees. These are employees that have only been in as employees for a year or two. The expectation is that they will all be fired this week. So we're also going to see a significant or insignificant, but some decline in employment, right? In employment. All right. So that is the oops. That is where we are with defense budget cuts. Defense budget cuts. All right. China. I read this story. I thought, man, are they listening to you on Book Show? But here's this is New York Times. President Trump is eyeing the possibility of a new trade deal with China. More than half a dozen current and former advisors and others familiar with Mr. Trump's thinking say that although there would be significant hurdles to reaching any agreement, the president would like to strike a wide-ranging deal with Mr. Xi, one that goes beyond just reworking the trade relationships. Now, you could say this is just the New York Times, who believes them, and it's quite possible that it's false news, fake news. We will see, right? We will see, as they say. I believe this completely. I've been saying that this is going to happen before I read New York Times or anybody else. It just makes sense. It's just consistent with Trump's MO. He likes Xi. He admires Xi. He respects Xi. And he's going to want to cut a deal with Xi. A deal bigger than any deal ever in history. The greatest deal ever. Make America and Chinese rich again. I don't know. Now, the suggestion in this article is that it's mostly about trade. Part of it would be a requirement that China buy a lot of stuff from the U.S., that it starts importing things from the U.S., maybe even natural gas, who knows. The reality is that a deal that Trump signed with Xi in 2020 that required China to increase its buying from America by $200 billion. That deal was signed. China never, ever, ever lived up to it. But it doesn't matter. The point of signing deals for Trump is not that the other party lives up to it. That's not the point. The point is that he signed a deal. The point is that he is a deal maker, the best ever in all of human history, the greatest deal maker in all of human history. That is what he must be remembered as. That's what's behind all this. So this is going to be interesting to watch. Will this deal exceed just trade? Maybe involve Taiwan? Is it possible that Trump would consider basically announcing that he accepts China's claim on Taiwan and encourages the Taiwanese government to cede itself to China in exchange for some Chinese promise about chips and TSMC or something else? Who knows? Maybe in exchange for, the building of Trump Towers in Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou and Taipei. I don't know. But if a deal is going to happen, everything is going to be on the table. All right, quick one. This one's, I don't know if it's quick. Anyway, another one on Elon Musk. So this is from the Wall Street Journal, and you judge whether you think this makes sense or not. I'm reading from the beginning of the story. A lawyer at advertising conglomerate Interpublic Group fielded a phone call in December from a lawyer at X. The message was clear. According to several people with knowledge of the conversation, get your clients to spend more on Elon Musk's social media platform or else. Indeed, the CEO of X has made comments that seemed like similar warnings in conversations with other executives at Interpublic. Interpublic indeed interprets the communication from X as a reminder that Elon Musk and the Trump administration might torpedo a merger between Interpublic and Omnicom, which was announced late last year, that they would ban it, stop it from happening, unless Interpublic played along by getting more revenues for Elon Musk. As a consequence, Interpublic has recently signed a new annual deal with X and is bringing on more spending. In other words, we're now selling we're now basically doing a quid pro quo. You spend more money on Twitter, we'll allow your deal to go through. You spend more money on Twitter, the Justice Department, the FTC won't stop your merger. Indeed, days after the Interpublic Omnicom merger was unveiled, Jim Jordan, Republican, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, launched a probe. The tie-up raised anti-competitive concerns. You thought this was only Democrats. Now, in addition, if you remember, X filed a federal antitrust lawsuit in August accusing the World Federation of Advertisers of colluding against for a boycott of X and Musk. So Elon Musk is already trying to use antitrust law in favor of his company. And now, of course, he's in a position within government to have an impact on a lawsuit like that. In early January, right, as X has actually raised up the ante by alerting the court that it planned to add more names to the lawsuit, sue more people. And advertisers are frantic. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that Amazon has now decided to advertise on X. Apple is probably going to start advertising on X because they think X is such a valuable, important platform for them, or whether they need to ingratiate themselves on Elon Musk because of his position in the government. Probably the latter. It might be that Elon Musk is going to be the biggest swamp animal ever of all time. He might well become the champion of swampiness. This is as crony as it gets. It doesn't get more crony than this. And yet, Elon Musk is going to clean up government, is going to eliminate corruption. I just don't see it. I think there are people working in Doge who have all the best intentions. I don't think Elon Musk is one of them. I don't think it anymore. I used to have a much, much more favorable opinion of Musk. No more. It's gone, sadly. I wish we had more heroes in the world. All right, quickly, a correction to a story yesterday. I said something about quantum computers that is probably wrong. So I said quantum computers, these new quantum chips that Microsoft has built that might be competitors to NVIDIA. They could do all these things much faster, much better, but it turns out that they're not really competition. And this is from a message from Jeremy who sent me this. He says, quantum computers are great for specific tasks, like factoring, cryptography, probability-based algorithms, and science tasks like simulation of quantum systems. These are things modern computers struggle with, but quantum computers excel at. Quantum computers, on the other hand, are not great at everyday tasks like running databases or training machine learning models, and are unlikely to replace NVIDIA or server farms or data centers, etc. Quantum computers are more likely to be used for specific problems and integrated into hybrid systems to augment classical computing, which will continue to be used for general purpose computing. All right, it's great to get that clarification. I'll also, it's worth quoting from the CEO of Microsoft, one of those Indian migrants to America. It's terrible, handing this country to the Indians. Satya Nadella, he says, a couple of reflections on the quantum computing breakthrough we just announced. Most of us grew up learning there are three main types of matter that matter: solid, liquid, and gas. Today that changed. After nearly 20-year pursuit, we've created an entirely new state of matter, unlocked by a new class of materials, conductors. That enables a fundamental leap in computing. It powers Majorana 1, the first computing processing unit built on a topological core. We believe this breakthrough will allow us to create a truly meaningful quantum computer, not in decades, as some have predicted, but in years. The qubits created with conductors are faster, more reliable, and smaller. They are 1/100th of a millimeter, meaning we now have a clear path to a million qubits processor. Imagine a chip that can fit in the palm of your hand, yet is capable of solving problems that even all the computers on Earth today combined could not. That's inspirational. It's inspiring. It's the fact that there's still stuff like that going on in the world that still makes me think we have a chance because all the rest is unbelievably depressing. All right, let's go to our super chat. I'll remind you, Alex Epstein is a sponsor of the Yaron Brook Show. Go to alexepstein.substack.com for the most accurate, the most philosophically worthwhile, but worthwhile really from a practical and a moral perspective, information about fossil fuels, energy, fossil fuels, energy, climate change, and environmentalism. You get talking points. You get the best tools to communicate these ideas to whoever you are generally arguing with, or just in your own mind. You'll just solidify your knowledge of everything so much better. Alex is a treasure, and you can access him by going to alexepstein.substack.com. You can benefit directly from this treasure. Ayn Rand Institute is also a sponsor. They are now encouraging people to join our auditing. You can audit Ayn Rand University classes, including my Introduction to Finance and my Capitalism courses. These courses, as an auditor, you have access to 10 courses starting this academic year, right now. You can attend classes live or watch recorded lectures. You can ask questions live in class and in office hours. Now, we've got a special running where if you are a Yaron Brook Show supporter, subscriber, you can get, or actually just listener, you can get 10% off ARU auditing using the code YBS10, YBS10, when you check out. Go to aynrand.org/start here, aynrand.org/start here to get this 10% discount offer right away. All right, let me thank Wes. Thank you for the $50 sticker. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mary Aline. I know we had other stickers. Thank you, Colt and Eyal and Arum and David King, who gifted a membership. And thank you to JB. Thank you all for the stickers. It's a great way to support the show. Easy, and you don't even have to think of a question in order to do it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, let's jump into the questions. First one from Paul, $50. Really appreciated that. Jonah Goldberg likened Trump to an 18th century dictator. Treats his allies like enemies and fawns over strongmen and thinks of himself that way. Like Greenland belongs to me, Ukraine belongs to Putin, and Taiwan belongs to Xi. Agree? Yes, absolutely. Trump is acting like a strongman. I don't know about 18th century. I don't know enough about 18th century strongmen. But yeah, I mean, he's carving up the world among the different strongmen. Basically, the United States will have Canada and Greenland and maybe ultimately Mexico and certainly dominate Central and South America. Xi can have Taiwan and Asia, basically, influence in Asia. And Putin can have Europe. And this is, what is it? In the old days, they used to call this great power politics. This is great powers carving up the world. And instead of recognizing the uniqueness and superiority in every dimension of the United States, Trump has never thought that way. He's never understood American exceptionalism. To him, America is just another country that happens to be his country, and therefore he wants to make it great. But it has nothing to do, zero zilch to do with anything more than that, ideas, any kind of moral superiority. He definitely buys into the Tucker Carlson view of America as, yeah, it's got great scenery and love of God, but nothing special. And it's no better than Putin's Russia or Xi's China. Indeed, they at least have strong leaders. And we, with the exception of Trump, always have weak leaders. And that's literally how we've used the world. So, yeah, I agree completely. I think Jonah Goldberg has written some of the best pieces on Trump, and I agree with his analysis. He's one of those few conservative voices who get it and who are standing up against Trump. But it's too late because people like Jonah Goldberg are never Trumpers, so they've been written off by most of the right a long time ago. They have really no influence. Hopefully, one day they will rebuild the conservative movement, the Republican Party. But I don't see how and I don't see when that could ever happen. Harper Campbell, did you see the 60-minute piece talking to German prosecutors about how they prosecute hate speech on the internet? Courts can seize iPhones over hate comments. They're fighting imaginary fascism with actual fascism. I haven't seen the piece, but I know this, and this is very similar to the UK and elsewhere in Europe. Yes, the hate speech laws are awful. Their ability to execute on those hate speech laws are awful. With the rise of the AfD, they've become more militant about, this. You cannot fight fascism with fascism. You cannot fight fascism with limitations of free speech. The only time it's okay to limit speech is in a war. You can't have people in the United States advocating for Nazism while we're fighting the Nazis. But once the war's over, once you've won, the Nazis can march. They have a right to speak their mind. They might not have a right to speak their mind on public property, but that's a different question. But they have a right to speak. So it's really awful what's going on in Europe. There is this movement towards greater fascism. And notice that it's all tilted in a sense that the only threat that Europeans see to so-called democracy or freedom in Europe is from the right. That is, you can be a communist in Europe, you can be a communist agitator in Europe, and you're fine. Nobody's going to take your iPhone away from you. They only see the risk as coming from the so-called right. They only see the risk coming from fascism. They refuse to see any risk coming from the left, coming from socialism or communism. And, that's partially because of the history, in particular of Germany, but half of Germany was oppressed by communism for, 40 plus years. So you would think they would know the evils of communism as well as the evils of fascism. But all they've really internalized are the evils of fascism. Jennifer, it's a mixed up world with Chuck Schumer. When Chuck Schumer starts making sense, he stood up and condemned Trump's Ukraine comments. Good for him. Yeah, good for him. But again, partisan politics is easy. The left hates and they make these comments. The left, sadly, has been good on Ukraine. Sadly, I say because it's sad that it's only the left, but the left has been good in Ukraine. So has the left in Europe been good in Ukraine. But too much of what happens in politics is theater. So I don't know what Chuck Schumer believes or doesn't believe, and I don't really care. He's a nothing, and this doesn't change that fact. It is sad that all we have is theater, and it is sad that all we have is leftists defending Ukraine, and that the right. I mean, you have Kissen, and you have Jonah Goldberg, and you have this IO whatever on Twitter, and you have others online defending Ukraine, but it's too few, and not the most significant voices out there. I wonder, I don't know. You guys tell me what Ben Shapiro's view on Zelensky and everything Trump is doing in Ukraine. You'd think a Ben Shapiro of a few years ago would be pro-Ukraine and very anti-Putin and horrified by what Trump is doing. I will say this, Mark Levin, who I almost never agree with anymore, right? He used to be quite good, but he became awful and big Trump supporter and everything. On this issue, is hugely critical of Trump, very, very pro-Ukraine, or more correctly, anti-Putin. So give Mark Levin some credit for, at least on this issue, being anti-Trump. And, yep. Alexis, and I don't know if I understand the question, Alexis. I'm sorry. If that is the damage done in 1 month, what on earth will there be to save in 4 years? Damage done to whom? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the 1 month is and to whom. So maybe you can just put on the chat a little bit more info with regard to what exactly you're asking about or talking about, because I don't quite understand. Arun, how many previously anti-Trump have brain rot versus declining to join winning party? Saw a recent Ted Cruz interview and didn't seem too bad. Maybe hope. Also, I like Hanania. Thanks for himself and is pretty objective. Thinks for himself, I think you're saying. Thinks for himself and is pretty objective. Yeah, I like Hanania too. I said that. I like him. He seems pretty objective, and he does think for himself, and he thinks pretty well. That is, he has some good things. On this post, I thought he was pretty terrible, but generally, I think he's pretty good. How many? I think Ted Cruz is brain dead. I think he's a lost cause. Maybe you saw an interview with him where he seemed okay, but everything I've seen from him over the last few years has been terrible. And I just don't see much hope from anybody in the Republican Party right now. Anybody. So I'm not sure what he said in the interview that seemed good. And the unwillingness to criticize Trump right now on Ukraine says it all. Many, many people in the Senate know better. Know better. Andrew, it's unfortunate that we live in a cynical culture in which some people will laugh at you for taking life seriously. Do it anyway. Yeah, absolutely. One of the great tragedies is the cynicism and skepticism of the life of the culture in which we live. And the lack of idealism, the lack of ideas, the lack of principles. This is why I think the culture is completely capitulated to Trumpian pragmatism. Michael Sanders says, Javier Milei declares National Day of Mourning for Bibas babies. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's warranted to have a National Day of Mourning. Maybe you should have had a National Day of Mourning of October 7th, which is when the Bibas babies were killed by Hamas. Even though, yeah, I mean, not literally, but that's when they were sentenced to death. Yeah, Javier Milei is great. There are a few kind of right-wing leaders right now that are pretty good on Ukraine and on Israel. Milei is good. Meloni, Italian is good. There are a few of them. There's just not many. Ryan, if we go on for 4 years like this, what is the probability that there is a real backlash internally in the U.S. where midterms blow this thing up? I mean, midterms could be brutal to Republicans. Now, it depends what happens. It depends how the economy is doing, basically. It depends, what people out there, who are not me and you, but people out there's perception of Doge and all this cost-cutting or so-called cost-cutting or pretend cost-cutting is. It depends on whether they get $5,000 checks into people's hands as a bribe, even if that means long-term inflation or even if that means they're making it all up and blowing up the deficit. Even if it means all those things, people might not think long-term and just celebrate the fact that they got a check. I don't know. What this all means from an electoral position. I'm not very good at assessing the mood and the minds of the American people. Okay, the Doodle Bunny, 4-part question. I completely disagree with you about Trump eliminating congestion pricing in New York City. It was an extra $20 a day just to drive into Manhattan, promoted by environmentalists. Increased the cost to commuters in already overtaxed city. Good for Trump. These arbitrary socialist surcharges need pushback. And since people couldn't afford to drive into Manhattan, more people were taking the subway, which are already overcrowded and were already adding new trains to the routes. It was also hindering interstate commerce from New Jersey, an egregious rights violation. All New Yorkers, regardless of party, are glad it's done. I don't think any of that is, I don't think that's true. First, it's a state issue. It's a local issue. It's not a federal issue. Trump has no authority over what they do at that level. Second, imagine if the streets of New York were privately owned. Imagine if the streets of New York were privately owned. Would they impose some kind of congestion pricing? Probably varies according to time of day, but would there be a strong inclination by businesses and by people who live in Manhattan to actually control the number of cars that are coming into the city? Absolutely. So one of the ways I judge whether something like this makes sense or not is if it wasn't the state controlling the streets of New York, but private citizens controlling the streets of New York, private enterprise control, would they impose congestion pricing? And the answer is yes. They would toll it and make it expensive to come into Manhattan because Manhattan was getting insane. It was getting to the point where to drive from Midtown to downtown Manhattan would cost an hour and a half or two. So I absolutely think, A, it's inappropriate for Trump to do it because it's not a federal issue, it's a state issue. And B, I think it's a completely rational thing to do. Now, you could argue that there are other things New York City could do, like London imposed congestion pricing. Again, I think a rational thing to do. But they also put in bike lanes, which is completely nutty and insane and would never happen under private ownership of the streets. All right. Let's see. But you know, I've been stuck in traffic in New York. So the cost is very, very high and you've got limited capacity. It just is limited capacity. You've got to regulate that capacity in some way. And the way to regulate it, the best way to regulate it is by imposing a cost on it. And that way, the people who value going by car into Manhattan pay the cost, and the people who don't value going by car into Manhattan don't pay the cost. And that's how the private sector would do it. So to the extent that the government's mimicking it, look, nothing the government does in that sense is legit. But to the extent that the public sector, the government is mimicking what a private sector solution would be, good for them. John, repeating Alexa's question, will Trump doing so much damage in 1 month, what would be left to save in 4 years? Ah, I see. Thank you, John, for clarifying that. I think it's I don't know what's going to be left. We're in deep, deep trouble. And he's done a huge amount of damage already, not just foreign policy, but domestic policy across, some things are great, like energy and some deregulations. And firing people. I'm all for firing bureaucrats. But the disrespect for the rule of law, the growing disrespect on the right for the courts, and the cronyism, the increased cronyism, the just nuttiness of Trump, who I think is just a nut, and then the damage internationally, who knows what's going to happen in 4 years? It really is insane. I don't know. I can't predict it out there. Thank you for explaining, Alexis. If he got it wrong, then let me know and I'll try to give it a better answer. Andrew says, the right rightly points out the newspeak of the left, in which it twists language to defy reality. But is there also newspeak in referring to Putin and North Korea, slave master as great leaders and Zelensky as a dictator? Well, of course. The right is very good at this. They've been doing it for a long, long time. Trump is particularly good at it. If you repeat a lie over and over and over again, it becomes instituted into the culture. It just becomes accepted. People just accept that it's true. The left taught this, but the right has completely learned it. Completely learned it. And the right is very good at it, and Trump is very good at it. Repeat, 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 repeat. Never apologize, never change your mind, never introduce the subtlety. Just repeat the absurdity over and over again. That is the newspeak. And people will ultimately think that it's absolutely true. There's no question that it's right. And what they're doing about Zelensky, exactly that. All right, I have a hard stop in about a half an hour, so we'll keep going here, and hopefully I can get to all your questions. Tom says, I see the James Bond films have been fully sold to Amazon. I wonder if anything decent is made that objectivists would want to watch. Skeptical. Hard to tell. Once in a while, there's a decent action movie that's worth watching. Whether they're willing to do that with James Bond, I just don't know. I just don't know. And don't ask me to name now what I think is worth watching, because can't do it. I can't come up with those kind of. I can't answer those kind of questions for some. That's not how my mind works for some reason. Maybe it used to. It doesn't anymore. Kabuto, what did you think of comments from J.D. Vance that Euro left authoritarianism and restricting of free speech is a bigger problem than Russia? Yeah, I mean, I think it's as big a problem in Russia. I don't think it's a bigger problem in Russia. And it's the kind of problem I wouldn't be surprised that Russia's fueling. But yeah, I'm glad J.D. Vance said what he said about free speech. I think it was absolutely appropriate to say that free speech is a real issue in Europe, and Europe needs to get its act together. Free speech is that important. That's one thing worth fighting with allies over, arguing with allies over, right? So calling them out on the free speech issue, 100%. Rest of his talk, not so good. And the examples he gave, not so good. And his own defense and Musk's defense and Trump's defense of free speech, terrible, 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 terrible. Andrew, part of the problem with Ukraine, I can't talk. Part of the problem regarding Ukraine is some people are conflicted about whether Russia is America's enemy or ally of Western civilization. Yes, I've talked about that many, many times. This was Jordan Peterson's problem when he was angry prophet mode. And the right ultimately views Putin as a representative of the West. Yeah, maybe invading Ukraine was not so nice, but basically he is the West. Why is he the West? Because he's a Christian. Because he is, Jordan Peterson would never say this, but because he's white. Because he is strong. I don't know what that means, really. Because he doesn't like gays and doesn't like trans and doesn't like the left and says he doesn't like communism. Although he's a kind of an authoritarian socialist himself, right? I mean, the means of production are owned by the state in Russia. Oh, if you include the oligarchs as the state. So he's a socialist. But he hates the left. Cultural left. Oh, he hates immigrants. It's another one. He hates immigrants. So he's anti-woke, which makes him good, which makes him pro-Western civilization. Raphael, never been so disappointed by Musk. I agree, and he's only getting worse. Esoteric dichotomy. Hey, Yaron, pundit politicians make claims, but even if the opposite happens, their credibility remains intact. Isn't this destructive to the nations? Yeah, but the destruction is the fact that people don't think in principles, don't think at all, have joined tribes, and therefore don't question and don't challenge their political leaders about anything. That's why their credibility stays intact, because they're part of our tribe. We don't question our tribe. We accept all from the people who are in charge of our tribe, unless they betrayed the tribe. Liam, Elon Musk has a lot of respect for Blake Scholl. Is there any way Blake can sit down with him and convert him to objectivism, or at least move in the right direction? You'd have to ask Blake that. I don't know. My view is there is zero chance that can be done, even if Blake could actually sit him down and talk to him, or even if Blake wanted to sit him down and talk to him. I just don't think Musk is in a place cognitively, psychologically, where he is open to arguments. I don't think he is. Enric, would proponents for objectivism in the political sphere, like Alex on energy, be effective and worthwhile? Would proponents for objectivism in the political sphere? No, I don't think so at this point. I think what you need is many Alexes taking on particular topics within the scope of politics. So politics is this overarching. But if you had energy and you had a foreign policy and you had a defense thing and you had a trade, if you had a trade economist type person, and if you had all these different people, right? Then that would have political impact. I think the way right now to have political impact is to deal with the concretes and to drive people to the more principled economics ideas as represented by Ayn Rand herself or by ARI or by the Yaron Brook show or by others, right? So I think right now we need sector expertise and sector activism. Matt, Alexis says damage done by Trump in 1 month. Yes, so I covered that. So I actually answered that question a little after your question came up. So somebody came in and explained that to me, and I answered it. Matt says, the Milei crypto fiasco needs more coverage. It's not looking good for him. Can I email you a 20-minute video from a reputable source who breaks it down? Sure. You're on at yaronbrookshow.com. I think we still need to wait to get more information about what actually happened. But yeah, it already yesterday was not looking good for him. But then again, Trump did exactly the same thing and got away with it completely. Andrew, is the undercutting of altruism a precondition to the reconfiguration of the government to its proper scope of power? Absolutely. Absolutely. And ultimately, that means the undercutting of Christianity. At least getting people to the point of the founding, which is a soft Christianity, more of a deist perspective. That's why it's so hard. Esoteric dichotomy. Some invoices at my work already show tariff charges. We buy from all over, and they are passing the cost on to us. We will have to pass on to customers. Yeah, of course. I mean, why is there any surprise or doubt? Why is there any surprise or doubt? Ian, are you going to watch the US-Canada hockey game tonight? Also, do you acknowledge that hockey is the best sport? No and no. I don't like hockey. I've never really enjoyed hockey. I've never really watched hockey much. And I'm not going to watch the game tonight. And I'm not sure who I would root for right now if I did watch the game tonight, which would be even worse. So, no, I've never been interested in hockey. Even when I lived in Boston as a teenager, and Boston had a great team back then, I didn't really watch hockey. I love basketball. It's my favorite sport right now. I used to like baseball a lot. I have to really get into baseball to like it, and I'm not in. I know people really I love hockey, and I probably, if I want to see a game live, I would probably fall in love with it because they tell me it's a completely different game once you watch it live. Andrew Traeger, really respecting John Bolton these days. Yeah, I've respected him for a long, 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 long time. I've known him, and I know John, and I always liked him. We disagree on a bunch of stuff, but I still liked him. Alexis, I meant the Trump damage done in 1 month. Yeah, so I answered that. I'll answer it again. I don't know because it's been so bad that I don't know how to project it over 4 years. And I don't know if it can be sustained at this pace, but maybe it can because he's got Musk with him who has youthful energy. I just don't know how bad things could get, but they could get very bad. And whether there'll be a backlash in 2026 in the elections and what will Trump's response to that be, and who is the heir apparent within the Republican Party for Trump? Is it J.D. Vance or is it Trump's son? I guess that also depends on how this administration does. A lot of question marks on how the next 4 years, and all we've seen so far is it's going to be a roller coaster ride. And, some good will happen. As I said, some good has already been done. The DEI executive order is revolutionary. We need more. We need it legislated, but it is already, and I think they could get it legislated. I think you could pass a bill in Congress with some Democratic votes to ban DEI from government. I think you could do that so that an executive order in the future couldn't reverse it. Democrats might vote for it. Yeah. Final question, it looks like. Richard came in with the $20 question. You scoffed at George Orwell as arguably the best advocate of free speech. I agree, but where does Orwell run afoul of objectivism? Oh, everywhere. I mean, look, Orwell was good on free speech, but Ayn Rand was better. That is my point, because Ayn Rand was more philosophical in her defense of free speech, but Orwell's good. I mean, if more people were Orwell free speech we'd be in a better position. Where does Orwell run afoul of objectivism? He's a socialist, a real socialist. Even though he's critical of communism, he was a socialist. Orwell was, as a socialist, I can't imagine he was a real individualist. While he objected to authoritarianism, he didn't object to oppression by democracy, and I don't think he objected to the welfare state. So certainly in politics. Now, in morality, I can't believe he was an egoist or individualist from a moral perspective. I don't know how bad his ethics were. So I don't know, but I'd expect he was some soft kind of altruist. And I don't know about his epistemology and metaphysics. He's probably pretty good at metaphysics. I don't know about epistemology and how committed he was really to reason. Probably decent, but he was pretty mixed on all those things. All right, guys, thank you. We're in 2 hours exactly. Short $57, but okay, pretty good. We got another $5, so I cut through what we showed. Do you think the United States should have never aided Ukraine, also having funded this war? Isn't it a waste of U.S. efforts to just secede to Russian demands? Yeah, of course it's a waste. Yes, I do think the U.S. should have aided Ukraine. I've got a talk that I gave a year and a half ago about why I think Ukraine is just. It's a just cause. It's a good cause. And why I think America should support it. I think morally it's clear. You have an anti-Western, anti-civilizational, anti-freedom aggressor, Russia. And you've got a country trying to move to the West, defending itself. You've got to support the pro-Western self-defense party. And then in terms of sending money and military, given how much money the United States spends on crap, given how expansive the U.S. government is today, spending money in Ukraine is one of the better things the government can do. It is, again, Ukraine is at the forefront and at the forefront of the fight for Western civilization. It is fighting for the West. And Russia is fighting against the West. And we should support those who fight for the West, at least given the way our government is. If we had a laissez-faire capitalist economy and a laissez-faire capitalist government, proper government, an objectivist-like government, inspired government, Russia would have never invaded Ukraine. Russia would be a non-factor in the global economy. It would, under Putin, it would be insignificant. So you wouldn't have to support Ukraine. But in the world in which we live today, yeah, supporting Ukraine was right. We should have done more of it, and we should have taken off all the limitations and let Ukraine rip with whatever weapons systems we gave them. All right, guys, I will see you all tomorrow, and have a great rest of your day. And let's hope we get some better news in the days to come. And let's hope, hard to believe, but let's hope I'm wrong on some of these things. It would be good if I'm overly pessimistic on some of these things. What are your thoughts on government having a sovereign wealth fund? Something about a government investing that rubs me the wrong way. I've talked about this on the show before. It's absolutely wrong to have a sovereign wealth fund. No government should have a sovereign wealth fund. Government should not invest. Government are not investing arms. It gives the government way too much power over business, over investing, over picking winners and losers. Government should, if government has excess money, it should return it to its citizens, its taxpayers, and let them make whatever investments they want. This is doubly, triply, quadruply true of a government that is running massive deficits and has huge, huge debt. It should use whatever surplus it has to pay off the debt and then start cutting taxes. It should never have a sustained, positive flow. If it is bringing in more money than it's spending, then return that money to taxpayers, cut taxes. But no, a sovereign wealth fund is completely anti-ethical to everything that government is supposed to do. It's destructive to liberty and freedom. Destructive to liberty and freedom. All right, guys. See you tomorrow. Have a great day. Let's hope for some good news. Bye, everybody.